Okay, thanks for listening attentively to what has been a very varied but interesting set of presentations. We've now got about 15 minutes or so for questions. So can I open the floor up? Could you say who you are, what your question is, and also who you'd like to ask the question to, whether to the whole panel or to someone specific?
I'm Fariha Iqbal. I'm with the GEF Secretariat in their climate change adaptation team. And I actually do have a question for David and Abdul Latif. You said that for the Morocco Ports project that those engaged in operations and construction of the ports are also going to be integrating climate change adaptation considerations. And I was wondering, once the EBRD project is closed out, are they going to be applying technical specifications that were agreed during the assessments for the project? Or is the project actually building their capacity to be able to undertake the analysis that's needed for climate resilient design in the future? Thanks.
Well, you will consider what questions have been raised by these many presentations. Let's start with this answer for David and Abdul Latif.
So I think it helps to distinguish between the two projects that were mentioned. So the Nador WestMed project, which was that was a sort of EBRD and Moroccan government project, so that was before the GEF-backed project. That contains some forward-looking provisions about what concessionaires and future operators are expected to do and to build into the future operation and design of the port. So that's sort of been put in place and mandated for the future, but hasn't been worked out in technical detail at this stage. And it's not really possible to do so because it's looking forward 5-10 years about when that will be done. But in terms of the wider approach then about capacity building, I think the answer is yes, very much so. That is something that will be supported. So a couple of the interventions in the project that we're working on with ANP and with GEF support include the formulation of a national level working group, which provides a forum for multiple actors in the sector, so the public sector, but also private sector operators, the weather authorities, potentially construction companies, people who will all have a stake in design and the way that the standards and guidelines can move forward. So that will give a forum for stakeholders to contribute. And then also within the technical assistance program, we will be helping ANP to develop technical standards and guidelines together, for example, drawing on things like the PIANC guidance, so that becomes embedded in ANP's own sort of approach and operations, and that way that the standards and policies sort of get disseminated out into the ecosystem, if you like.
So, merci pour cette question. En fait, je crois que Alan a donné les éléments d'appréciation, puisque le cas de Nador WestMed, ce n'est pas le cas donc, du projet de l'Agence nationale des ports, sachant que, pour votre information, nous sommes partie prenante dans Nador WestMed. Il s'agit de notre concessionnaire, mais en même temps, c'est une filiale de l'Agence nationale des ports, eu égard à l'importance du projet qui va certainement donc apporter énormément d'avantages et de bienfaits à la fois au niveau portuaire mais aussi toute la région avec le décongestionnement de la zone et le renforcement de la connectivité de cette zone. Mais pour revenir au projet de l'ANP, j'ai parlé tout à l'heure de modèle effectivement parce que toutes ces composantes constituent donc permettent une complémentarité des différentes parties prenantes. Nous sommes le GEF, nous sommes la BERT, mais nous sommes l'ANP, et chacun trouve son compte, bien entendu. Nous avons le souci de réaliser une infrastructure portuaire. Le GEF a le souci, la préoccupation environnementale. La BERT doit assurer le financement, mais aussi il a le souci de la préoccupation environnementale. Et donc, nous nous sommes mis ensemble pour bâtir quelque chose qui permettra de préserver l'environnement, mais tout en atteignant les objectifs recherchés à travers les projets à financer. Et là, il me semble que c'est un modèle, ça a été cité par notre collègue tout à l'heure de la Jamaïque, c'est pratiquement le même montage, mais pour relever la question fondamentale des barrières de financement des projets donc, qui contribuent à la résilience climatique. Et il me semble que, on l'a dit au début donc, de ce forum, au mot d'ouverture, il faudrait être ingénieux et créatif avec des idées nouvelles qui, en même temps, encouragent des projets, ce genre de projets à voir le jour. Et là, je verse à haute voix. Donc, l'État ou les autorités doivent être partie prenante à travers, pas nécessairement des appuis financiers, mais des encouragements réellement. J'imagine des encouragements d'ordre fiscal ou tout autre encouragement et incitation qui pourrait permettre à ces projets de voir les jours. Merci.
Okay, thank you both. Right, after these moments of reflection, excellent. The gentleman just back there.
My question relates to the issue of building resilience into the infrastructure. How do you balance the physical infrastructure as it relates to mitigating risks and the insurable or the transference of risks? And based on what Jan was saying about the options that you have really to add to the physical risk management in your infrastructure, how do you, as I guess James and David, as lenders, balance that physical risk management versus financial or insurable from a climate change perspective? Do you go for the physical or do you transfer that? Oh.
Okay. Any final questions before we head to the coffee break? Okay, Michael, what's your question? It is Jan, and we can cover this after you two, Juan. Based on your experience with doing the Piang guidance, where do you see either money or reforms from a public sector perspective being most useful in building the capacity and desire of port operators to implement that guidance? James?
Could I just come back to the question from the audience first? Is that okay? I think what we find in reality is that you do what you can in terms of the physical infrastructure side, but that one needs more emphasis on monitoring, on maintenance, and on contingency planning. So usually a solution will be a mixture of those things. It would be unusual, unless you have a fairly modern piece of infrastructure, that you would be in a position where you didn't want to do something. But I think what the process of preparing the guidance has done is to say that maybe rather than build the most we can for the money we have, we need to look at catering for the immediate term, so 5, 10, 15 years maybe, and then investing in monitoring, so we know when we need to modify, investing in maintenance, because I think that's an area where you look around the ports internationally, if you look at some of the problems that extreme weather events have caused, those problems could have been reduced quite significantly if assets had been maintained properly. And as I said earlier in the presentation, look at contingency planning. So what do we do if? So it doesn't take us by surprise. And I think we need at the moment, until we have more certainty about climate change, we need a balance between those four things. And I think the challenge then is how do we change the financing regime to cover that? Because at the moment, the two things aren't really matching up. So I don't have all the answers, but maybe a kind of strategy. And now I'm sorry, I've forgotten your question, Michael.
Yeah. So I think the question about insurance and what's insurable is a great question. I mean, we could have a panel on that for an hour. But I think, let me just offer a few thoughts in terms of the way in which we're approaching this. I mean, the first, I think, is at the Paris COP, there was the Institute Resilience Initiative announced and has put money into Africa and the Pacific and the Caribbean for increasing insurance, both at the sovereign level and sort of deepening markets at the corporate and personal level. And I think what I really like about that whole insurance proposition is it taps into new sources of finance. The insurance companies are really keen to use their pools of capital to support that kind of activity. And through insurance, you can start to price some of these risks. That enables you more effectively to decide the trade-offs between what you're going to build physically and what you're going to insure in the market. But of course, as that stands, that's just a zero-sum game. And what we're really looking for is to manage the risk that exists more effectively. And as we build up better information and better data, we can use that information to enable us to manage some of those risks more effectively, which reduces the cost of insurance and also builds this more systematic approach that enables you to think about not just the infrastructure itself, but also how it's maintained and how it's going to be used over the course of its life. And I think, if I come back to the 5 things that I talked about, I do see this as being a really key component of the institution strengthening side of things, because and the participation of the finance ministry as well, because finance ministries tend to take a financial and economic view around these things, and institutional capacity building enables the planners and ministries who are actually implementing them to take a much more informed view around the trade-offs between what to finance directly and what to insure in the markets. So I think this is a really, really important topic, and what I think is kind of the tragedy that's playing out in the Caribbean at the moment. At least some of these risks are going to be insured, and with some good fortune, some of that money will get to the people who are most vulnerable and need it most, really quite quickly, to help them respond to the tragedy that's happened there.
Thanks, James and Jan. I'd largely echo what James and Jan have said. I think from EBRD perspective, because a lot of our lending is with the private sector, we do a lot of project finance-based lending where we'll really look at the risks around a specific project without any additional support or guarantee from elsewhere. So we are often in that approach of really looking at isolating the financial risks of the project and how best you manage that. I think that the point made about distinguishing between physical measures will make your asset safer. Financial measures, insurance just redistributes the cost. So on a system basis, in having more robust infrastructure, if that extra dollar investment has a positive NPV, it should be done as long as the incentives are there, that that investment is the benefits of that investment are captured by the person making the investment decision one way or another. In terms of then specifically the question of how much you'd rely on insurance or asset risk or physical risk, obviously it really depends on the individual asset and the sector. I think it's worth looking at the distinction between what one might call everyday risk, gradual small risk, and catastrophic risk. Because actually, climate change can just increase your maintenance costs by a few million over the course of a project. Now that you can probably deal with by putting some of the incentives on the person best placed to manage those risks. So that might be around having payments based on availability to encourage maintenance, that sort of approach. If it's really catastrophic risks, then you're looking at a combination of the insurance market, and if you're in a a PPP type environment, we'd be looking at, who takes the risk of force majeure type events, and, is that reasonable to ask the private sector, and by extension the private sector's lenders, to bear those risks. So, long answer, but very, very good question.
Okay, everybody. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our audience. We're now having the coffee break. And firstly, just a round of applause.